10 ways to scientifically improve your sense of meaning and purpose. This is part 2 of my series about nihilism and existential crisis and how it correlates with therapy. So go back to part 1 of this video for the differences between nihilism philosophically, which is a worldview that's neither positive or negative, where there's no inherent meaning in the universe. You can absolutely be thriving as a philosophical nihilist. And then there's nihilism psychologically, which is the felt experience, the psychological experience of not feeling like there's any meaning, and those are different. And so some of the issues that we're having with nihilism and the meaning crisis is this gap we're experiencing where people will go to therapy and therapists can work on the symptoms of feeling meaninglessness, but not wrestle with the ethical and philosophical questions of whether it's worth it to be alive. So in this part 2 series, I want to talk about some of the scientifically proven ways to increase your meaning and purpose and which ones your therapist can or can't help with. That way you can be more skillful in what getting help means for you. And you can either better work with a therapist, or maybe you know what you need better so you can narrow down where those gaps are for your sense of meaninglessness, whether that be psychological or philosophical or some combination of both. And so before I start, let me just first define purpose as just I'm not going to get super philosophical about how we're going to define this term. We're just going to say it's how you wake up in the morning, where you know who you are, you know what you're about, you know what you want to do that way, to what you want to do that day and why, and you have some natural motivation, meaning your brain is on board to showing up and engaging with the world. Now, religion does give this to you on a platter. It says, here's who you are, here's the story, here's the community, here's where we need you to serve, here's the mission, here's the goals, here's the good guys, here's the bad guys, here's what to do with your life. And as problematic as Mormonism was for me and how easily disprovable of a religion that it is, it almost doesn't matter when it comes to purpose, because religions don't have to be true to be able to give you all that. But when I was Mormon, and again, I want to preface this by saying, even though there were limits to my human development, even though there was certainly long-term harm by being a woman in Mormonism, and it's not true, all of that, I can tell you, though, if I'm honest, from a self-reporting stance, that I was 10 out of 10 when it comes to self-reporting a sense of purpose. I woke up, I knew what I was about. I was involved with the neighbors and community and events. There was always something to do where my service was needed. I was teaching Mormon seminary. It was a paid job where I could feel like I was making a difference by teaching the good of Jesus and the good things of religion. My marriage had shared goals. My kids had a path. I didn't have any feelings of meaninglessness as a Mormon. I really didn't, if I'm being totally honest. Now, that doesn't make it true. And this idea came up in the very big recent conversation between Alex O'Connor, philosopher, Dr. K, psychologist, and he does, I'm learning more about his work because he does interact with nihilism some, and a Christian apologist. I'm not in the apologetic world to even remember what his name was, so you'll just have to look that up, on the Diary of a CEO YouTube channel. And it was a very interesting conversation, but kind of difficult for them to find common ground. So this conversation was about the meaning crisis and how do people find purpose. And the reason that they wanted to do this Diary of a CEO is because he had so many friends who were just they financially were fine. They were in a place where they weren't kind of in abject poverty, but they felt like they had no purpose, and they had a lot of depression relating to not having purpose, and he didn't know how to help them. So he brought these 3 different perspectives on for how we deal with this meaning crisis. And it's interesting that the apologist was talking about nihilism as proof that all we got to do, guys, is just go back to God and religion. And Dr. K was talking about nihilism psychologically as something that you can improve as a mental state. And here is what's happening at the level of the brain to be able to show that this is just something that you can train your brain to do. And Alex O'Connor was the philosopher who was talking about how do we ground this philosophically, because you can improve your mental state and your sense of purpose, but also be delusional in the same way that I was Mormon, where I had a good mental state and a sense of purpose when I was Mormon, but it's delusional in a philosophical sense because it's not mapped onto reality. And that difference between nihilism philosophically and nihilism psychologically that I did in my last video, it came up in this conversation because Alex O'Connor would say that's delusional, and Dr. K would think that he was talking about delusional as a psychological state, like schizophrenia. But the way that we use delusional in philosophy is that your worldview, even if it gives you, a positive psychological state, we can call it delusional in philosophy if it's not mapped onto any kind of coherent worldview. You could still then say it's delusional. And so this is the difference that I've been talking about, and it was so interesting to watch that come up in that conversation. Anyway, my point in bringing that up was my favorite part of the conversation was when the Christian was like, if you need meaning and purpose, just go back to church, because we have scientific proof that shows that people's lives do get better when they go back to religion. And that is proof that the religion is true and that it works. And there's such obvious holes with that, because people in thousands of different religions over tens of thousands of years have gotten their purpose from religion. And some will say, yes, that's because, all paths lead to the same God. But all of these religions contradict each other. There's not one consistent doctrine, right? And some self-support 10 out of 10 in their purpose without any religion at all. So there's not one consistent thing about all of this religious doctrine or even the lifestyle of the religion that we can pin down and say, this is where God is because this is where purpose is. What we can say is that built into religion, no matter what the doctrine is, it really actually doesn't matter, are tools that can help you with meaning and purpose. That's all we can say. But you can't take that and say that the religion is true. And so what I want to try to do in this video is kind of I'm going to kind of ignore the Christian apologists for a little bit, because I don't think that's going to be the future for us. I kind of want to marry Dr. K and Alex O'Connor essentially in that conversation, which is how can we ground this a little bit more philosophically? But what are the ways that we can psychologically improve this sense that we have, this subjective sense of meaning and purpose? Because religion will give you purpose, but it has a high cost. In return, it's going to ask you for your moral compass and your money and your identity, sometimes your rationality, your life. And for me, that's too high a price. And so what can we do outside of religion? Because religion is a cognitive technology that we develop to be able to do all this work for us, to feel the kind of purpose that religious people feel without the religion. How can we ground it in something that Alex O'Connor wouldn't say is delusional? Do you know what I mean? And so let's talk about the 10 top ways scientifically that we can improve your meaning and purpose, and also whether therapists can help with that or not. Because there's a difference between if that's the gap for you, what person is the best person to help you with that as far as getting help. That's what I want this video to be about. So the first one is number one on my list. I'm going to do 10 top reasons to improve your meaning and purpose. The first one is choosing to engage with something on purpose. Now, this sounds counterintuitive because we're all burned out. But when life is happening to you, your brain's limbic system, especially the amygdala, dominates, and you're in a reactive defensive stance. And the prefrontal cortex, which is responsible for reflection and long-term planning and symbolic thinking, goes kind of partially offline because you're in survival mode. So choosing to engage with something like, I'm going to get better at this for no other reason than I want to watch myself get better at this, signals to the brain that I'm not in survival mode, I'm an agent. And when you're an agent, your emotional brain can come back online. And so when I did this TikTok, I had so many people say that taking up knitting, for example, helped them more than they realized. And if you're in a deep depression, it's like, what's the point of knitting? I'm going to die. There's no point of this. But what something like knitting does is signals to the brain, we're not in survival mode. Let's play. Let's experience. Let's get creative. Let's make something for a friend. Let's improve this experience of life because I can feel my feelings again. Oh, there's my feelings. And it can do more for the brain than what you realize. And this is one that a therapist can tell you to do, but one where your therapist won't know what this is for you. So this is an experiential thing. Your therapist will tell you to do this, but what that is for you is something that you just have to try and explore. This is an experiential thing. Number 2, choose one thing per day or per week that is according to your own core values, that is acting according to a core value. So when life happens to you, you swing between dopamine spikes when you're chasing distraction or relief, and dopamine crashes, which is learned helplessness. I'm not going to try because there's no point. And we kind of swing between the two. When you choose to act towards something that aligns with your values, you get these smaller, steadier dopamine signals that are reinforced by serotonin. It becomes this engine that works for you no matter what's going on in the world, because you know who you are and you are intentionally showing up in a way that for your psyche is very satisfying. If you don't know what your core values are, which is sometimes why so many people coming from religion, especially queer people and women, have such a hard time, is because you have to stop and do some personality work. You have to live a bit. You have to get a sense of what kind of thing you are. A core value isn't something you pick off a list because it sounds virtuous. It's something that feels like oxygen when you live it and feels suffocating when you betray it. So in psychology, acting in alignment with your values is one of the most reliable predictors of a sense of purpose and well-being. And we have this 2020 meta-analysis in the Journal of Positive Psychology that found that value-based behavior had a significant positive correlation with both life satisfaction and meaning in life. And Dr. K talks about this constantly. Purpose is what happens when your dopamine system serves your values instead of your impulses. When you live by a core value, honesty, creativity, compassion, learning, dopamine release becomes steadier, reinforcing kind of long-term engagement instead of always having to distract yourself. And then serotonin kind of stabilizes that, so you have this feeling of calm confidence no matter what's going on in the world. It's the neurochemical difference between chasing highs that never satisfying and actually building a life. So you pick a value, just one, and show up for it this week. It doesn't have to be dramatic. If you value curiosity, learn something new and tell someone about it. If you value compassion, text the person that you've been avoiding because it's awkward. If you value integrity, keep a promise to yourself. Your brain will start to notice a pattern. I said I'd do something and I did it. And that loop repeated is how the self becomes trustworthy, that you trust between you and you. And that is the foundation of purpose, because you have a relationship with yourself. You're witnessing yourself. As far as therapy, this is one where therapy can help, but only some kinds. Existential therapy helps with this. Logotherapy helps with this. ACT therapy, which is acceptance and commitment therapy, helps with this. And these are the most empirically supported therapies for existential distress. And it's built entirely around this principle that you can't control the chaos of life, but you can live according to your core values. And that is strong enough that it passes the concentration camp test. It passes the Auschwitz test. If you can't build meaning and purpose when you're in Auschwitz, then it's lacking in some way. But this one actually does. You would, people who acted according to their core values, even when they felt like they had no control over their life and literally everything was stripped from them, were able to survive better and also had less PTSD if they did kind of survive that experience. The brain interprets the world as coherent because you are living according to your own core values, and it's worth it to show up in that way again and again. The thing that we want to stay away from that is not statistically as helpful is cognitive behavioral therapy, because that's framing your philosophical nihilistic thoughts about the nature of reality as a cognitive distortion. And that's where that's where a lot of nihilists will struggle in therapy, because it's better to accept philosophical nihilism as some kind of reality and build a life that can withstand that reality. And a lot of that has to do with living according to your core values. This is where philosophers and psychologists align really nicely, because the psychologists are looking at the brain saying, hey, we know why this works. And the philosophers like Nietzsche and Simone de Beauvoir and Sartre, all the existential philosophers, are like, hey, if the universe doesn't give you inherent meaning, then you build your own moral code according to your values and become what Nietzsche called the Übermensch, which translates into something more than a man, because you live according to your own code, right? Number 3, get intentional. That's interesting. Get intentional about what a life worth living looks like for you, and start taking risks in that direction. This is one of the few practices that we have really good data on, that it actually changes a person's sense of meaning. There's a study by psychologist Laura King. She's at the University of Missouri. And the study was in the Journal of Personality and Social Psychology, where participants were asked for 15 minutes a day for 3 to 4 days in a row to write about their best possible life, not their current one and not like a I'll win the lottery one, but a life that they would most want to live, a life that they would most want to experience, and the self that they would most like to see themselves become. What happened was stunning. Even months later, the group that had written about their intentional Ideal life showed higher levels of meaning, greater life satisfaction, lower depression than the control group who just wrote about neutral topics. So, in other words, simply describing a future that would be worth living organizes your motivation system and gives your nervous system something to aim for. Because imagining a meaningful future lights up the brain's default mode network, which constructs our narrative sense of self and connects it to part of the prefrontal cortex, which handles planning and decision making. And that bridge between story and strategy is kind of the neurological signature of purpose. That's what we find when people self-report that they're 10 out of 10 in purpose. They have some bridge between the story of their life and what they are and how they're showing up in the world. And so when you picture a life worth living and write it down, your brain begins to update its reward system to match that trajectory. And it starts releasing dopamine not only when you achieve those goals, but even when you take small steps in that direction. And so the future becomes emotionally alive in the present. And so for me, I can't tell you how much my life changed when I realized I'm not in a life worth living. This life sucks. It's somebody else's. And I'm already suffering. So what am I holding on to? I'm already suicidal. And I started talking about this on TikTok and on a podcast that nobody listened to. And even though that didn't dramatically change my life right away, it changed my depression because I was taking risks towards the life that would be worth living, which is having these kinds of conversations with other people. And so even though I wasn't there yet, and even though I may lose, or even though I may have failed and not been able to do this work at all, it started to improve my life because I was at least on this path. And yes, this is one that therapists are trained to help with quite a bit. Therapists who especially work with meaning, again, this is going to be logotherapy, narrative therapy, acceptance and commitment therapy, will often use this exercise because it rewires both the story of what's going on in your brain and the chemistry. And so I do a whole course on this if you're interested, just because it was so helpful for my nihilistic clients to help define the story of their life now, a story of that they would most want to experience, and also the character that they most want to witness themselves become, even within the nihilistic construct being true. And that's the big key, because in therapy, they often tried to change my nihilistic outview by saying, like, maybe there is a God, or we do have free will, or, there is an afterlife. Let's do gratitude journaling, or all these other things. Those anchors didn't work for me. So I didn't feel like I had a reason to improve my life, because it's like, well, why? And so once I had a philosophical framework of moving into life as something to be experienced rather than there being some kind of purpose in the universe, once I was able to make that philosophical shift, now I could do more of the psychological things, like work on the story of my life, in order to build a life that could withstand that nihilistic construct, which more or less didn't change. I still believe that the universe doesn't care that we're here. I still believe I'm going to die. I still believe I don't have free will or a soul. I don't believe in an afterlife. I don't believe in the supernatural. I don't believe in manifesting. I still don't believe in any of those things. But because I was able to accept that and still build meaning and purpose within that construct, it enabled me to move forward, where now I'm in a place where, even though Mormonism was 10 out of 10 for purpose, I now experience a 10 out of 10 as far as self-reporting purpose in my life. I'm very awake in my life. I'm very like, I wake up and have a sense that how I show up that day matters. And I have a lot of all these things. I have a lot of service in my life. I have community. I have a job that's meaningful, all of those things. And it doesn't have to now it's under the construct that's much more stable, which is the construct of nihilism versus the construct of Mormonism or Christianity or theism, which was much more unstable, because eventually my analytical brain would have broken all those things down. Okay, number 4, prosocial connection and service to others. Serving other people is one of the most reliable ways to grow your meaning. It works because it pulls you out of your rumination and puts your nervous system into, like, approaching the world instead of avoiding the world, and gives your brain repeated proof that your time matters to other people. Volunteering is highly linked with higher life satisfaction, lower depression, reduced mortality risk over time. Lots of studies on this. And prosocial spending increases your well-being. I'm just looking through all these studies, but like you guys know this, like there's so many studies that show this. And participants who, for example, spend money on others report more happiness than if you were to spend that money on yourself. And this is across income level, across countries. And so this is one of the reasons why religions help so much with meaning and purpose, is because there's endless service projects to others, and people are genuinely appreciative when you can see their heart being touched when you bring over dinner, or you mow someone's yard because they're sick, and you rake the old person's leaves, in your congregation. And in Mormon land, this was almost constant. Like I didn't even have time to think about meaninglessness because I had so many ways that I was showing up in community in ways that matter. And your brain likes it because service is this self-transcendent goal. It helps you tap into that neural network of something bigger than you, rather than kind of that self-obsessed ticker tape of neuroticism. And it stabilizes your reward chemistry. And so acting, especially when you're acting in alignment with your values, it lights up the ventromedial prefrontal cortex, which is about self-relevance. It helps the default mode to integrate this coherent story that I show up and it matters. And that story will start to feel like purpose on its own. And again, a therapist can tell you to do this, but it's something that you've got to do. It's an action that you've got to take. You've got to find a place to plug in somewhere. Number 5 is building in rituals. Rituals I talk about them a lot. It's one of the oldest human technologies that we have for lots of things, for meaning, for purpose, for marking our values. It increases pleasure, it decreases pain. And it helps us process emotions. So they really do a lot. And every culture has used them to make ordinary time feel sacred, or to connect the individual to something larger, to remind the brain that life has rhythm and continuity, even when circumstances change, which keeps you from going into survival mode with the chaos of life. And so when you lose religion, you lose the built-in rituals that mark seasons and grief and growth and gratitude. And your nervous system notices. So there was a 2020 study done in the Frontiers in Psychology that found that secular daily rituals, even when they were secular, shared meals, journaling, morning routines, correlated with high measures of meaning of life, social connection, emotional stability. But it's harder because you have to be that engine rather than the church just being that engine for you. And why this works for the brain is that rituals calm uncertainty, and the brain's threat system, which is the amygdala, hates unpredictability. So when you perform something rhythmic and symbolic at regular intervals, lighting a candle, taking a walk, and listening to a podcast, every Sunday morning, whatever it is, you're still signaling to the brain safety. And that allows that prefrontal cortex to stay online and process long-term meaning, rather than constantly scanning for danger, which is going to look like everything sucks all the time, because then you start doom scrolling, right? Rituals also help you strengthen your identity. It's repeating an intentional act in a structured way, which trains the brain to see continuity, which gives you a lot of coherence, that feeling of I'm witnessing myself. And people who have that also self-report a stronger sense of purpose. I did a whole chapter on rituals in my book, just because there's so much science behind it and how much it helps our brains. Another great book on this is that does just rituals in the book is Small Creatures Such as We by Sasha Sagan. It's up here somewhere. I think it's like teal. It's one of these. And it's about her building rituals into her life as a secular person, the daughter of Carl Sagan. So this is something that therapists, I think, do help with. Ritual creation is a way that we externalize intention. So therapists may help design rituals around anything that you're feeling stuck around, because it helps the brain to kind of close thought loops. And therapists are known to prescribe things like, writing out a letter and burning it, because it actually scientifically helps you to move forward with something. So much of my nihilism was actually being able to not be able to process the death of God in a way that kind of allowed me to get it out of my body. And rituals help me do that. So rituals, calm our nervous system so that they stop scanning for danger. And it stops you from existential drift, where you just have these thoughts all the time. What's the point anyway? Why am I here? What happens after I die? Do I even want to be alive? Blah, 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 neuroticism. That dies down when the brain knows what to expect. Number 6, speaking of body, yes, you can improve your sense of meaning and purpose with how you treat your body. I hate this one because I'm not a body person. I have to work hard regularly to get into my body. I prefer to be in my head. I had no idea how much of my nihilism was a body problem, not just a philosophical problem. For many people, if you fix their body, whatever their brain was thinking as far as their philosophy of life will just change and fix itself by itself, right? Same thing with like processing trauma. Sometimes people are nihilistic just because they have a trauma body problem. And so their body is shut down. And so they're not engaging with the world. So they're philosophically meaningless. But if you actually fix the body, the philosophy fixes itself. So my body was constantly signaling threat, depletion, collapse, and the brain can't build meaning when you're in that state. You can't think your way into purpose when your body thinks that you're dying. And so when you move and you breathe and you do breathing things and you eat nutritiously and you engage the vagus nerve, which communicates between, the gut and the heart and the brain and all these things, activating the nerve signals. All of this is just telling the brain we are safe enough to engage with the world. And then that starts to turn on parts of our brain that can work on meaning and start to give you those serotonin and dopamine hits for when you're on your path of meaning. And this is why practices like yoga and walking meditations and cold exposure and breath work can feel spiritual even when it's stripped of religion, because they help you find coherence between your body and your mind. They turn chaos into rhythm. They help your nervous system believe what your philosophy already knows, that even if life has no inherent meaning, this moment is still happening and you're still here for it. There's something to witness here right now. This is the reason why I like the Wim Hof types. And if you hear his story, he's had some rough times. His body was the key to turning his brain back on after his wife had killed himself and he was totally shut down. So I'm not going to offer advice here because you've heard all the things: sunshine, breathing, nutrition, vagus nerve, sleep, hydrating, meditation, weights, walks. What we do need for people who are philosophically nihilistic is you have to have a philosophy of life where it's worth it to experience a better life first. Because without that, I didn't care about improving my body. Because why? I had no framework for that. If evolution is rewarding me for running from the lion with a runner's high, then I don't give a fuck, because who cares about giving a runner's high? Because evolution doesn't know the modern world that I live in. And what is even the point of that if evolution just wants me to reproduce? And I say want in this general way, like someone in the comments keeps saying, you keep saying evolution wants. It's just a shorthand, right? All of this is natural selection. But I really was like, I had no reason to take care of my body because I couldn't care enough to. But once I had some other things in place, like, hey, I'm already suffering here, I may as well try to see if there's a life worth experiencing that I could construct. Then I could start taking care of my body. And as my brain became able to come back online and I could feel again, things began to feel inherently meaningful again, and I could adjust my life so that I got more and more of those things. And so now I exercise not because I care at all about how I look. And people who have watched me for the past 4 years have noticed that I've had some weight loss. And it's not because I do any diet culture or I care about how I look, but it's because taking care of my health is aligned with my values, which is aligned with my philosophy of life. I want to watch my kids grow up. I want to give my brain its best shot at health so I can enjoy being alive, because when my brain is unhealthy and my body is unhealthy, I am more nihilistic. I'm more suicidal. The one that always comes up for me is when I eat chocolate, I get very nihilistic. And so I try to avoid chocolate, not because I have any moral statements about sugar. I really don't care. But because I've built my life around this idea of what is a life worth experiencing and what is a body that is most conducive to that kind of life. And so this is where health coaches who aren't about diet culture or the way that you look, but care about improving your quality of life can help. For me, a diet never helped, but paying attention to what makes my brain feel like it didn't want to die I'll be honest, it did help. But I needed a philosophy first that allowed me to give me a reason to be able to even put in that effort, if that makes sense. Number 7 is stopping the ruminating. Anytime we catch ourselves ruminating, especially when we don't have any new information, that's kind of like the rule that I have for myself, that if there's a new rabbit hole I want to think about, fine. But if I wake up and it's just the same nihilistic, blah, 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 the same old stuff, and it's not that I've discovered some new philosophical argument, then I'm ruminating because of my emotional state. And you can't think yourself out of thought loops that you thought yourself to get stuck into, right? And so if the ruminating is thinking constantly, what is my purpose? What is the purpose? What is the goddamn point? And this is where a lot of young people get stuck because they're waiting for purpose to just knock on the door and say, I'm here. Instead, we have to shift the brain into saying, what's something that's felt in the past inherently meaningful that I can try and cultivate today? And that's a way to reframe that feeling of like, I'm not feeling great right now, into something that will actually change your life versus just thinking about it. It would be like if you tried to get healthy and every day you were freaking out about what's the best diet for me? What's the best diet for me? And you just read more articles about you should eat this and you shouldn't eat that. Actually, this is okay. This is not. You drive yourself crazy. And this is where highly analytical people drive themselves crazy and get nowhere. But if every day you said, what's a way that I can treat my brain and body well? Well, that trains your brain to look for opportunities. I'm going to take a little walk. I'm going to try this yoga class. I'm going to eat an apple. I'm going to see how it feels when I eat dairy. I'm going to see how it feels when I don't. It's a perspective shift because purpose isn't something that we find. It's something we cultivate. It is a skill set. It's something you can learn to do even within a nihilistic context philosophically. And then life gets to be more enjoyable. That's all your purpose has to be, just enjoying the ride more. It doesn't have to be some grand narrative about how you're the center of the goddamn universe. You don't have to gaslight yourself into believing anything. You can build purpose within the construct of accepting death, accepting chaos, accepting that maybe we don't know what objective truth is, accepting suffering. But we do have to stop the ruminating where you are just thinking all the time, life has no purpose. Where is my purpose? What's the perfect job that's just going to give it to me? What's the relationship that's going to make me feel complete? Blah, 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 blah. And reframe it to what can I do that has been meaningful to me in the past inherently? How can I build that today? Or if you don't know yourself very well, it can be I'm giving myself space to explore who I am and what I am. Because this is the thing, if you're suicidal and you haven't yet crafted an intentional life, you haven't created that, I feel like it's sad that you would give up before you actually know what life could be. That's tipping the scales towards life is meaningless, towards life being meaningless before you've given the chance to exist a real chance. That's not a fair fight. You got to give that a fair fight. And that is where therapists can help at reframing ruminating. And good therapists can differentiate between whether you're ruminating or whether this is a legitimate philosophical view that is valid. And that is a place where cognitive behavioral therapy can help. But you usually need some philosophy first in order to have a coherent worldview before you can engage with stopping the ruminating, or else it just will feel like toxic positivity or gaslighting if you really need to talk about, the philosophy and ethics of being alive. Number 8, awe. I do a whole chapter on this on my book as well. If you've ever stared at the night sky and felt something click back into place, some sense of you being a part of something that's bigger than you, it's one of the most powerful antidotes to nihilism the brain has access to. It expands our perception. It quiets the ego. It reconnects you with larger systems that you're a part of. Psychologist Keltner, who spent decades studying awe, defines it as the experience of encountering something vast that transcends your current frame of reference, especially kind of that neurotic self-obsession. And so in his research at UC Berkeley at the Greater Good Science Center, moments of awe were found to increase people's meaning and purpose and improve overall life satisfaction. Your brain loves awe because it activates the narrative self while dampening down the rigid self-referential chatter. And this is why people who who describe awe as ego dissolving, where we kind of temporarily silence the I that's narrating everything self-obsessively, why it's so helpful to just quiet that. And if depression and anhedonia is making you so shut down that you can't feel awe anymore, you can't drop into that place where you can remember what it feels like to just be without your inner neurotic chatter, that's when psychedelics enters the chat. I can't recommend anything specific to you. Of course, there are warnings for those who have a history of schizophrenia, psychosis, bipolar 1, but we do have reports that it can and does help with purpose because it does give you access to that awe, especially if you have treatment resistant depression. It's one of the few things that can break that, because, and it's interesting with psychedelics, it makes improvements in OCD and also PTSD and also nihilism, and depression. And it's like, why can it help all these things? And it's because it just breaks your thought pattern of whatever thought loop that is, whether that's an OCD thought loop or a PTSD thought loop or a nihilism thought loop, or a depression thought loop. It can just break that for a second and allow your brain to go to other places, which is very helpful. So high dose sessions often quiet the default mode network. It increases this global connectivity in the brain, making these kind of rigid self stories about how the world is meaningless and there's no point, and I have, there's no point to my life. It'd be better if I hadn't been born. Those are all self stories that can become more flexible when you give your brain a chance to break outside of it. Number 9 is community, especially when it's connected to your identity in a healthy way. So belonging, again, one of the strongest predictors of meaning and purpose. Belonging does a lot of things for our brain. It lowers threat reactivity. It lets that default mode network weave a story that you matter to other people. I matter to the us. And that narrative is purpose. It's built into community. And so we don't find community on this side of things outside of religion, where there's some perfectly U-shaped hole in some community that you could just walk into. That probably doesn't exist. You have to find what communities can you serve in. And for me, and for most secular people, it's a lot of communities that you're cobbling together. So I play pickleball every Wednesday, and that's kind of like the athletic part of myself. I have witchy friends that I do seasons with. I have 2 best friends that I can be myself with. I have my family. I have a few families that my kids are friends with. I have some local friends. I have a few conferences I go to every year. And I also have an online community where I feel connected to other people, even though it's just social media. Because before social media, I felt crazy, like I was the only person who was in nihilism, considering the ethics of being alive. I have cabin mushroom friends. It's cobbled together, but I will say that like in Mormonism, I had a strong sense of community. When I first left, I was entirely alone, didn't have, like my marriage, my family, any friends, any community, had nothing. But because I had cobbled together a community 2 years ago, when my daughter fell out of a window, she had a traumatic brain injury. We spent 6 weeks in the ICU. And because I had rebuilt and cobbled together this community, they showed up. I had meals and help and people who helped watch the kids so I could go to the hospital, and I was well supported. And it felt better that the people who showed up for me weren't just showing up because they were checking off something, checking off that they're a good person in Mormonism, which is a lot of what the service ends up being, but because they were people who were genuinely cared about me, or people that knew my children, people who genuinely wished me well and wanted to help. And that was so meaningful. And so communities can be cobbled together. You're probably not going to find one-stop shop community outside of religion. I don't think that we're capable of having that level of community without some level of dogma. And then number 10 is to keep learning. One aspect of my nihilistic years is that I stopped reading books. I realized nobody knows shit. There's no objective truth. What is the point? He says something, she says something, they go on about you can know this or that. Nobody knows what the hell is going on. The people who most know what's going on, like, the smartest quantum physicists or whatever, are like, they just say how much they don't know. Like that's the smartest people, the people who just admit that they don't know anything. And so when you learn something new, though, anything from pottery to astrophysics, the brain's reward system lights up the same way it does during discovery in childhood. Novelty triggers dopamine, which directly improves motivation and meaning perception. And so we have some longitudinal studies that show that adults who continuously learn self-report higher meaning in life and lower depression. Um, and yeah, lots of studies, you get the point. But we have to be able to think about this in this nihilistic context, because it can be a way to hold yourself back. A lot of nihilists, especially former religious believers, end up turning learning itself into the new religion, where you're reading and studying and theorizing endlessly because it feels safe. It gives the illusion of progress without the vulnerability of participation. So learning can be a doorway back into life, but it can also be a bunker if you've spent years trying to think your way out of suffering. Nihilism makes it very tempting to stay in your head, to just read more Nietzsche, to watch lectures, to analyze existence like it's a puzzle that you're finally going to solve. That's not learning for growth. That's learning for anesthesia. The difference isn't the material. The difference is the direction of energy. So escape learning goes inward. It feeds a desire for control, uncertainty, and isolation. Engaged learning goes outward. It changes your behavior. It deepens your relationships. It changes how you show up in your actual day. And real learning produces kind of an actional residue, that something in your week shifts. You cook a new meal, you join a local astronomy group, you get better at asking questions in therapy, you experiment with how you parent, you start writing your own philosophy instead of just quoting others. If nothing in your body or behavior changes, then you're hoarding information because that feels safe. You're not integrating wisdom. Now, if you think this list sounds like a lot of hard work, yes, this is why religion exists. This is why religion is a cognitive technology. This is why we co-evolved with religion. The dumbest thing that I hear atheists say is that religion is just evil. It's just brainwashing. If we just got rid of brainwashing, then there'd be no religion. There's no good to any of it. It's only bad. No one needs it. It's literally the dumbest thing that atheists say. Religion did all of this work for us. It is a brilliant, even if not true, it is a brilliant cognitive technology, because you walk into a building and it does all this work for you. In fact, this came up with the Alex O'Connor conversation, which was this acceptance that the meaning crisis isn't new. The human condition, why we're here, what's the point, there seems to be a lot of suffering, that has been with us for as long as we've been human. It's religion and God that's been the coping tool that we came up with for tens of thousands of years. And with God increasingly not showing up in the world, and with the advances of science since the Enlightenment, really, we can see, and now we can see, we have this collective doubt because we can see everybody else's gods. We've lost our cognitive technology that we created as a shortcut to do all this brain work for us. I promise you, as a Mormon, Mormonism did all of this for me. And my purpose was 10 out of 10, but it was delusional and unstable, obviously, and had a huge cost to my development, and I think a cost to the world. In my nihilism, my purpose was 0 out of 10, and I envied people in religion because they were so dumbly happy. But working on all of these aspects in my life from the ground up, because I figured the way that I was doing things wasn't great, my life did get better. And I'm really glad that I didn't act on my feelings, my ideation feelings that I had at the time. I would have missed so much worth experiencing. I would have missed this career that I built, where I love to get to talk to people about this all day. I would have missed watching myself become someone that I admire, someone that I like being. I would have missed having authentic friends for the first time. I would have missed so much. Like, God, it's crazy to think about how much I would have missed. It would have been so sad to end my story where I wanted to end it, because there was so much better story to come. And so if you take away all the stories and say life has no inherent meaning, you don't actually end up with nothing. You end up with freedom. Now, that can be terrifying and it can be overwhelming, but the work isn't to find some kind of cosmic answer. The work is to build something worth waking up for anyway. Purpose doesn't drop from the sky or just, a therapist can't just give that to you. It happens when your body and your values and your attention line up for long enough for your brain start to think, okay, maybe this life thing is worth trying again. And then your life can get better, and you can start, instead of your depression causing your nihilism, causing your depression, causing your nihilism, which is the downward spiral, you can start spiraling in the other direction, where each week your life is actually getting better. Your body's getting healthier. Your relationship with yourself is getting better. You're connecting more to the world. Your depression's getting better. Your nihilistic philosophy, your nihilism itself is getting better. And that's the mistake that nihilists most often make, is you can't think your way into a purpose-filled life. You have to live your way into it. You cannot read enough or understand enough about the nature of the universe to find some kind of foundation, some grand narrative to build your life on. Meaning shows up through engagement. You don't actually need a God or a grand story to do that. You just have to. The reason that we have those grand stories and gods is because it was a cheat code, that if you just believe in this thing, that all of this meaning and purpose will be built into your life automatically. But you can build this from the ground up. You just have to keep showing up, cooking a meal, helping a friend, building something, learning something new. Little by little, your nervous system catches on. The feeling of purpose comes later, like muscle memory. It's not proof of anything cosmic. It's just the brain saying, I'm glad that I got to experience existence. And that's where I'm at now. My philosophy, as far as like a nihilistic outlook, didn't really change. But my experience within that philosophy changed, because it used to be, there's no objective meaning, there's no truth, there's no point, therefore I'm going to shut down, and there's nothing worth living for. And now it's very much the experience of, I'm glad that I got to experience existence. I am happy to be experiencing the life that I'm living now. And when it's over, I'll be ready. I'll be ready to go. I'll be ready to take a nap. I'll be ready to let it go. And so what I want to kind of express is, if you have listened to this whole video, which God help you, because that means that you're probably struggling with your sense of purpose. Not God help you, but you know what I mean. The thought that really helped me was, you're already here. You might as well try. Because let's be honest, if you're suffering and have a lack of purpose, what are you holding on to? And in order to start moving forward, it's easier. I'll admit, it's easier cognitively if you can gaslight yourself into believing something, and then you're Mormon and all of this is built into, for you. But it's never going to be your life. It's never going to be an authentic life. How could it be? How could a religion actually give you a life that is perfectly made for you? It can't. It's incapable. And so what I hope this list helps with is, it helps you maybe narrow down where are the deficiencies in your life, so that you can build that up from the ground up, sometimes with therapists and other resources helping, without needing your grand philosophy of nihilism, that there is no inherent meaning in the universe, without even changing that. Let's just accept that. Let's just accept that if you were to rewind time and the Big Bang happened and set off this series of events for no reason other than it just did, for reasons we don't understand, that if we were to rewind time and that were to happen again, we would always end up here. Like, if you account for randomness, and it's all determinism and account for randomness, you and I would end up right here, right? And so we're experiencing life. You're an experiencing thing. You may as well find ways to improve the experience of being alive. And if you build your meaning and purpose on that, you can move forward without you having to find, some grand story about the universe that makes all of this okay. Maybe it's not. I'm living a thriving life, and also I would not have designed the world this way. Like, I would not have designed it this way. This is a shitty, like, whatever, like, if there was a God who created this, it is a shitty God, not worthy of worship. But that doesn't mean that just, because I'm here, I'm already here, I may as well. That doesn't mean that I can't enjoy the strange lottery of what it is to experience anything at all. And I got better from the ground up of being able to build that into my life without having to gaslight myself into some optimistic philosophy of life or some religion. So the next part that I'm going to do, if you're going to follow along for this series, is a part 3 where we're going to do this process for teens and kids who absolutely can be experiencing existential crisis and nihilism before they even have a frontal lobe on board. And that's going to add some new complexities that we have to consider. So I'm going to do a part 3 on teens and kids and a part 4 on the autism community, because I'll be honest, anecdotally, probably 50% of my highly analytical nihilistic clients that are very stuck are somewhere on the autism spectrum. And there's also some things to consider with that, because you get a combination of being highly analytical, you get changes in what even community means to you. I mean, there's a lot of complexities that we can add for what this path looks like if you are on the autism spectrum. And we do have some data on that. I just did a TikTok on it, and I was looking through the data, and it was something like, 34% in this meta study of autistic people have ideation, and 24% had had an attempt. I mean, there are aspects of that brain where of that kind of brain where there's strengths and weaknesses, but one of the weaknesses is it tends towards depression, and it tends towards atheism, and it tends towards nihilism. And some of the tools that we have, join a community where you have to mask and then you become more exhausted, just doesn't match just that community in particular. So 2 more parts to this series, and I just hope that it helps you understand kind of this landscape of nihilism better, because for no other reason than like this would have helped me. This would have helped me separate what are my philosophical issues that I need help with, what are my life issues that I need help with, what is happening at the level of my brain, why am I dissociated, why do I have anhedonia, why is my body so shut down. And if I would have had more help with that landscape, then I feel like I wouldn't have had to have been in my nihilism for so long, because I almost didn't make it. And for people who look at my life now, they would say, oh yeah, like it seems like she has meaning and purpose, and she seems to be doing okay. But people don't realize like how close I was to not being able to get here. And so these are just, again, we're just navigating this nihilistic landscape so that hopefully you can find the right combination of tools for you that can help you move forward into improving the quality of life, the quality of the ride, just for the sake of the ride, because that's a foundation that you can't actually just destroy with your analytical brain. Because no matter what's going on with ultimate reality, you are an experiencing thing. There is a qualitative what's the word I'm looking for? There's a qualitative aspect to existence. And it's like the one thing that we can't be wrong about, the fact that we're experiencing something at all, because even if we're wrong, we're still something to be wrong about. So it's kind of like the I think, therefore I am. And so that is a stable foundation that you can build on, even in light of whatever, the horrors of reality you see, or whatever nihilistic worldview you have. And so that's been the most stable foundation that I've ever found, and enabled me to build a life that has all of the meaning and purpose that you get from religion, without having to subscribe to a religion that is almost by definition kind of delusional and insane. And that has been just so, I'm glad I was able to get through those darkest nights and those hardest times, because it was absolutely worth trying to live, to take risks, and to do this work on purpose, building a life of meaning on purpose from the ground up, because it would have been sad if I ended my story without being able to experience that. So I hope that inspires you. I hope there was something in there that's helpful. I'd love your comments, especially any questions for upcoming videos on the kids and teens and the autism spectrum. I'm trying to gather as much data, anecdotally and scientific data, on that as I'm preparing for those videos. And I just hope that you feel a little bit more seen, because I know not everybody experiences existential crisis and nihilism. Not a lot of people think about the ethics of being alive. And so at the very least, I hope this helped you to feel a little bit more seen, and maybe give you a tool or two for how to move forward, even in light of the horrors. And that's always what I'm trying to do here on this channel. So much love from me, Britt Hartley at No Nonsense Spirituality.